Welcome to the webinar. I'm hoping that everyone that's online and registered can hear clearly. If there are audio issues that you're experiencing, please use the chat portion or function on the webinar to let us know, and we'll do what we can to solve your issues. But with that, it is 12:02, so I'd like to start the webinar. First of all, thank you for joining our first inaugural Plastic Action Center webinar series. This is a first of what we hope to be mini-series throughout the 2020 year, specifically focused on the issues of plastic and plastic waste. And we're happy to kick off the series focusing on corporate commitments. My name is Joanne St. Goddard. I'm the Executive Director of the Recycling Council of Ontario, and I'll be hosting and facilitating the webinar today. To begin, I'd have to say that we were amazed at the volume of response that we got for this webinar. We're welcoming more than 170 registrants with just a few days after our announcement. So clearly that tells us that there's an incredible passion and interest in plastic and plastic waste, and more importantly, interest in the opportunities and initiatives that are currently underway across the country that are taking action to solve plastic waste and putting circular economy concepts into action. First, a bit of housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded and will be archived on our website, and we'll be sending out a notification to everyone that's registered and participating today. The link on the website will also include the presentation slides. As well as the presentation, we will be providing time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you look at the bottom of your webinar window, you should see a Q&A button. And if you have a question at any point throughout the webinar, please do type it in as you think of it. And at the end of the presentation, we'll answer as many as we can, time permitting. In the event that there are questions we don't get to today because of time constraints, we will do our best to take them away and address them in writing and post them on our website with the presentation materials. So with that, we'll get started. First, a little bit about the Recycling Council of Ontario. For those of you potentially out of province or new to the organization, we felt it may be prudent to give you a bit of background. We were established in 1978, so have been around a long time, obviously by our name focused initially on recycling and end-of-life management within the context of Ontario, but that dynamic is changing for us. We're doing a lot of work across the country, and we are now very much focused on opportunities of the circular economy and all of the upfront production and consumption points of leverage that come with that. But we've had a very rich experience in all things policy development, education, research, and programs that aim to support resource efficiency and waste reduction, and of course, supporting circular concepts into action. We fully embrace commitments being made at local, national, and global scales to transition circular economies, which leverage smart consumption, maximize resource use, and improve recycling outcomes. We have a strong respect for market dynamics and understand that they are at the heart of achieving our goals. Our important part of our mandate is to support markets and in particular keep members and stakeholders informed of changing dynamics of resource recovery markets. And that's why, and that's what's really leading the dynamic in terms of today's climate around plastic waste. I think we can trace public interest and our own organizational interest in what really caused this public crisis or this plastic crisis. And really by crisis, I mean opportunity, largely back to the 2017 decision by China to abruptly restrict plastic imports, recycled material from other jurisdictions, which really, I think, caused a worldwide surprise, all of which led to what we're now still experiencing, which is a glut of stranded materials stockpiles across North America and Europe. And really that's when governments, corporations, the media, and the public really started to take notice. It has been widely recognized that solutions for plastic waste require cooperation and collaboration across entire value and supply chains. We need everything from consumer engagement and awareness, strong public policy from governments that support local markets and infrastructure, and what we're talking about today, corporate commitments and innovations that demonstrate leadership. It is because of this multi-pronged approach and the imperative to share experience and knowledge that we founded as an organization the Plastic Action Centre, Canada's first national resource that offers a full view of plastic waste in every corner of the country. Our aim in doing so is to encourage connections and collaboration and engage knowledge to take action on plastic through resources and tools, facts and figures, market developments, business efforts, regulatory advancements, and policy initiatives, as well as almost daily media coverage. Starting today, we are expanding the Plastic Action Centre to interactively profile leaders in the 3 spaces we're focused on: business, government, and the community at large, who are taking action on plastic waste and providing an opportunity for you, our current and future members, who are interested in enhancing your knowledge. I'm pleased to have with us today Ms. Jennifer Barbaza, Sustainability Management Manager for Walmart Canada, whose Recycling Playbook is, in our opinion, an excellent demonstration of strong corporate commitments to reducing plastic waste. The Playbook is a comprehensive document that I think serves as really a retail gold standard on what organizations like Walmart can do to influence their vendors and suppliers to become more circular. Today, Jen's going to talk to us about the process in which the Playbook was created and how it's being used and received. So before I turn it over to Jen, a quick reminder that if you do have questions, to please pose them in the Q&A box in the lower part of your screen. And at the conclusion of Jen's presentation, we'll do our best to answer as many of your questions as we possibly can. With that, Jen Barbaza.
Thanks so much, Joanne. Can everyone hear me? Joe, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Jen.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you to all of you for joining. The pressure is definitely on. There's quite a few people that are taking interest, but for full transparency, that's exactly what we're hoping. This is a conversation that needs to occur throughout the value chain and the supply chain, and I'm really encouraged with the number of folks that are interested in engaging on the topic of plastic and packaging in general, and really happy to speak to some of the things that Walmart is doing. And again, really want to stress that it's not something we're doing alone or in isolation. We really are trying to seek out feedback and engage the entire supply chain for packaging and plastics, including processors at the end who end up processing and handling the material once it's done or served its primary function. So I'm just going to get started here. There we go. So advancing the circular economy is one of the conversations that I'm sure everyone is having, but we are definitely having it daily, if not hourly, here within Walmart Canada. These are just a couple of examples of commitments and or groups that we have engaged and are working with to really drive forward discussions on circular economy. 3 of these are external facing groups. So we were founding members of the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition back in 2018. The CELC seeks to foster collaboration among industries, experts, and communities at all levels and all levels of government. Again, really focused on changing the conversation, making a linear conversation into a circular conversation. Walmart globally has signed on to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Global Plastics Declaration, and we are actively working toward those commitments, and they have been integral in building our own plastics commitment and charter, which I'll speak to a little bit later, and was really, really key in development and ongoing use of the Recycling Playbook that we'll talk to. The other item that you're seeing here is Project Gigaton, and Project Gigaton is actually something, it's a Walmart initiative that the US team launched in 2017 that calls on suppliers to join Walmart in our commitment to reduce greenhouse emissions by 1 gigaton by 2030. The key to this project is really the engagement of our supply chain. And there's a number of different categories that suppliers can work toward a goal to reduce their emissions, one of which is packaging. In a lot of cases, we've seen the Project Gigaton discussions do a couple of things. One is just help folks quantify the actions that they're taking. And the other angle that we're seeing pop up and discussion that's really started is companies that didn't have a set goal or target are starting to set a goal, set a science-based target that they can work toward. So it's a great project for us and program for us to engage the value chain and our suppliers to have those conversations. It also leads to some great meetings internally because we're sharing best practices between suppliers and retail or ourselves, and we're just learning so many different things. It's been fantastic. We're seeing a lot of great traction here in Canada for that program. I'd be remiss if I didn't speak about the Plastic Bag Grab Challenge, which we partner with RCO to run annually. We partner with RCO across the country to engage schools to collect single-use plastic film bags and return them to our stores where they are responsibly recycled. Since 2016, there have been over 750,000 students who have helped to collect more than 65 tons of single-use plastic bags for recycling. And we're excited that the 2020 program will be rolling out soon. New this year, we're also working with Earth Rangers on the SUP mission, so the single-use plastic mission, which is really focused on engaging youth to reduce single-use plastics in their day-to-day routines. It's a fun and kind of neat way to engage that up-and-coming consumer, but also to really drive education and good discussions at home for folks, which has been really great. Full transparency, I have a 3.5-year-old, and we have taken part in some of these challenges, and it's been great, and it's been great to see how she responds to it. I will tell you that the challenge with the 3.5-year-old who now knows about recycling and plastics is that she does not have a filter, and she will definitely call people out for littering in public. So we've had to have a couple of conversations about, the level of pointing things out in public, mitigating some of that risk. Let's get to the meat of what we wanted to discuss, which is really what is Walmart doing on plastics and packaging, and what does our vision look like? So in 2019, January 2019, we came out with a very comprehensive plastics reduction charter. It touches on all sorts of things ranging from plastic bag reduction to reduce, reuse, recycle commitments, moving out of a commitment to move out of quote unquote difficult to recycle materials such as PVC. All of those different commitments really boil down to what you're seeing in this slide on the screen now. We're really driving this for our private brands, so the brands that we own and develop directly, such as Great Value and Equate, but we're also encouraging it for our national brands as well, and that's really where that Walmart Recycling Playbook comes in that I'll get into. But what we're looking at here is sort of the overall goal. So obviously, number one, use less plastic. So whether that's reducing plastic altogether, looking at refillable options or reuse as an option, looking to swap out or create a market for post-consumer materials, again, to avoid the use of virgin material in products. That's sort of that blue segment that you're seeing. Make it recyclable, so the packaging that remains, because we do feel that there's a time and a place for packaging, specifically when we're looking at product integrity and safety of items. This also comes into play quite frequently when we're talking about food loss and trying to minimize our food waste. There is a balance between packaging and food waste. What's really encouraging in that discussion is that I think people are looking at it a little more holistically now and saying, okay, if I need to get a little bit more shelf life, what can I do in the supply chain to decrease the amount of time it's perhaps sitting in a warehouse or sitting on a truck, so that maybe I can reduce the packaging because I've increased efficiency on delivery. So it really is a conversation about the supply chain. And you'll hear me say that quite frequently. But all that to say, the packaging that does remain, we have a goal to make it 100% reusable, recyclable, or industrial / certified compostable, really focusing on that recyclability piece right now. And I'll get into how we're doing that. The last item that we've got here is label it. So we're working with the How to Recycle program to help educate consumers on what to do with a particular material or package once it's reached its end of life. And the goal of this is twofold. Number one, it's to educate the consumer on the packages and products that they're buying. Number two is to really help facilitate a cleaner stream of recycling. I can tell you just even when at my own house, when I'm looking at the recycling bin, I find myself picking pieces out and saying, this actually isn't recyclable. And the question that comes from my family is, well, how do you know? And I thought, you're right. It's a hard distinction, especially when it comes to film plastics on which items go in the box, which items don't. So there's always that ongoing discussion. So the labeling and instructions have been, or we hope to help clear that up. The other interesting kind of perk, I guess, to labeling items is sometimes it sparks or accelerates a conversation about packaging material switches or substitution. So as a supplier, if you're assessed a label or a logo that says, not recyclable, discard in the garbage, that's got a little bit of a negative connotation. So sometimes what we're seeing is there's an accelerated discussion and look to a viable, safe alternative that comes up a little more quickly than perhaps it would have before, because you're highlighting some of the things that maybe folks that were developing those packages or materials hadn't necessarily thought of previously. So the Walmart Recycling Playbook. This is a playbook that was largely put together with our global counterparts. So there was input from Walmart teams globally. We had input from the Association of Plastic Recyclers, SPC, a number of different groups had input into reviewing, assessing. I know our CO had a look at it and an opportunity to go through the materials. But essentially, the Walmart Recycling Playbook looks to help identify packaging that is optimal, quote unquote, from a recycling perspective. Things that you could change, and things that fall into things you could change category would be where there's a known, viable, recyclable option that you could switch to. And then that yellow section of advanced is really where we're leaning toward or trying to lean in on innovation and promoting a different discussion about what could we do with these materials. The Recycling Playbook takes into consideration, again, that entire view of the recycling stages. So you can see collection, sortation, processing, end market recycling rate. Those are all things that are considered in the assessment. The cool thing about the Recycling Playbook, and it's something I'm really excited about, is this is publicly available. And this is something that we put out there on purpose. We want to have conversations with all of our suppliers. We want people to be able to see what we're doing in it and access it, and also provide a way or another means for folks to provide feedback on what we're trying to strive and drive toward. So definitely encourage everyone to have a look at it. Is every solution or every problem solved in this playbook? No, but it's a fairly comprehensive view of sort of the materials and processing and recycling services and systems we have available to us today. This document is a living document. It will change. You'll see, for those of you who may remember at the beginning of last year, this playbook was significantly shorter than it is now. There is definitely a lot more meat in it. So I'm actually going to just walk you through some of that. So give me just a second. And hopefully you can see the actual playbook up on your screen now. And I'll just scroll through it. It's 90 pages of recycling fun, so definitely encourage you to have a look at it. You've got the table of contents, which talks a little bit about how to use the guidebook and what it's intended for. What we've been suggesting to our suppliers and our merchants when they're having discussions is, as opposed to looking at it in its totality, which can be overwhelming, it might make sense to look at the ideas or the material types that you're designing towards. So if you're looking at designing or creating a package for a beverage container, you might want to strictly focus on the beverage container section. So we'll just scroll down to bottles, jars, jugs, and tubs. And you can see there's content and comments on various types of materials that are typically designed to hold those types of materials. And you can see typically used for food jars, beverage bottles in the case of glass. And we've got recyclable best practices up here, post-consumer content suggestions as well. and then materials that present recyclability challenges to avoid. I think that this has been probably the most eye-opening section of the playbook in every category for our suppliers and our merchants when we're having these discussions about packaging. Oftentimes we remember and focus on the primary container, but sometimes we may not always consider, what label did I apply to that? What seal did I apply to that? Are there other things that I could be looking at that maybe downgrade the recyclability of a given base product or base material? So it's been interesting and really good at sparking conversation. In terms of how this is being used and who's using it, it really is across the value chain. Like, as I mentioned, it is publicly available. It is something that our merchandising team, specifically our private brands team, uses when they're having conversations during product development. Again, it's a starting point for discussions. So sometimes they'll ask, could we swap this material type for this material type based on the green section of the Recycling Playbook? And again, it's a really great springboard for those conversations and discussions. Sometimes we've got answers. Sometimes we come up with, this is an area where we don't necessarily have a solution that we can switch to immediately, but it's definitely something that for us means continue to work with the supply chain and producers of packaging and resin materials to figure out, is there something we could do differently? Or when you're thinking about processing the material, what can possibly be done a little longer term to potentially recover some of those materials? But all that to say, this playbook has been a great conversation starter. We're seeing just a lot of things kind of bubble up to the surface that maybe people weren't thinking about before or didn't know before, or thought, oh, I thought all plastic was recyclable. I didn't realize that a plastic film might be multi-layered. There are additional challenges when you're thinking about contact with food, all sorts of different conversations that come up. The other thing I really think the Recycling Playbook is helping us to do is avoid some of the unintended consequences that you might get in the absence of that, especially given the fact of the discussions on plastic. There is an inherent reaction or a feeling of folks to move immediately out of plastics into something else. And sometimes when we start thinking about and looking through the recyclability playbook, that something else isn't necessarily better. As an example, perhaps you're moving out of a mono resin material into something that's got a paper with a plastic window or an insert that isn't necessarily ideal either. So some of that has really helped educate our internal team, and it's, again, just a resource that we are encouraging folks to look at. It doesn't mean all the solutions or answers are in there, but it's something that we're really hoping helps people feel a little more comfortable and confident in having those discussions and challenging the status quo, so to speak. So I'm just going to switch back to the presentation, because one other thing that we committed to was the How to Recycle logo. And we often get questions on the How to Recycle logo and what it is that it does and how we're using it. This, as I mentioned, is really designed at helping to educate folks on what to do at the end of the life of that product. And the How to Recycle team looks at all of those same things that we were talking about from the Recyclability Playbook. So not just can the resin be recycled, but is it functionally recycled, being collected, being sorted? Is there an end market for it? So it really is a thorough Canadian-based review of our recycling system and service. The question we get probably most frequently is, well, is it Canadian versus the US? And there are differences, as we all, many of you on the phone know. So there are lots of packages that, if it's a national brand, you will see US versus Canada labeling on how to recycle instructions, because they will differ and they are slightly different. On a lot of Walmart private brand products, you will see only the Canadian label because they're things that are unique to the Canadian market. And we are doing that in a number of cases, but many times it's because the packaging is bilingual here anyway. How to Recycle does have bilingual logos that we would drive and whatnot. The How to Recycle website has a ton of materials and a ton of resources for suppliers who are looking to access and leverage this logo. The application process does look at every component of the package, but it also considers the package in its totality. So, you know, a package may have 3 component layers, but if I, as a consumer, dispose of it as one unit, they would assess it as one unit. However, if I dispose of it as 3 distinct component parts, that is also assessed. They also take into consideration how you should dispose of it. So the example I always use is a recyclable dinner, or pardon me, a microwavable dinner, which has your base, your film, seal, and then your outer box. They would look at potentially all 3 of those component parts separately, because you would typically pull off the entire film when you were going to eat it. You would separate the box because you have to take the tray itself out of the box, and then you're left with just the tray. And so they'll assess the recyclability that way as well. Definitely encourage you to have a look at the How to Recycle website. It's a really good resource and has a ton of great information on there as well. So I would be remiss if I didn't speak about some of our progress and opportunities that we have as well. And I wanted to give you an update on some of the things that we're doing globally. So the benefit of having a global team, we are able to learn from each other and see what others are testing and trying. Wanted to share a couple of things. Asda, who was our Walmart affiliate in the UK, is actually trying refillables at a quote-unquote a sustainability store that they'll be launching later this year. So a real focus on unwrapping products, offering refillables. The image you see just in the center in pink is actually something that Walmart Mexico has trialed, which is a refillable container. So we're really excited to see and hear the consumer uptake and results of that trial. And then last year in Bentonville, Arkansas, we held a packaging summit. And this summit was a great opportunity for our suppliers to connect directly with innovative packaging producers. So almost imagine it like speed dating for packaging, where we had various networks and tables set up, and people could go around and just have those initial conversations and say, here's my product type, what kind of packaging alternatives do you have some really great discussions, connect with people, think about things in packaging in ways that they hadn't necessarily before. Had a ton of really great feedback on that session and just connecting that, and a big thank you to the Walmart US team for making that happen. And it was great. And then just a couple of examples, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but just some of the things that we've done in the last little while to start reducing our footprint. Obviously, we've unwrapped single peppers, and this was that example that I mentioned where we had to keep food waste in mind. We didn't want to increase food waste by unwrapping the peppers, so we really did look at the supply chain and say, can we make this happen? And the answer was yes. We've increased post-consumer recycled content in some of our clamshell packaging, so you'll see that throughout our bakery assortment. And we've started to use the How to Recycle logo on our private brand products going forward. So you'll start to see that more and more as you continue to sort of shop through the aisles in the stores. I think the other thing that you'll notice is the How to Recycle logo is starting to pop up on a lot of national brands. So, you know, if I step back and think about myself as a consumer, when I started to look for that logo, I noticed it on a lot more brands than I thought I would. And I was really excited about that because it's a little bit more of a harmonization. Again, completely voluntary, but as a consumer, I appreciate that because it does help streamline those conversations. And then I think that was it for me. See here. Yeah, so that was sort of my planned presentation. Again, I think I wanted to just share with the group that I do feel like the conversations that we're having on packaging and plastics are a lot more deliberate than they've been, 15 years ago. People are really looking at this as a another solution or solutions that they can bring to the table. We're hearing conversations from our suppliers who are coming to us with more innovation and people looking to test and trial different things. There is, as Joanne mentioned, there's not a day that goes by that I don't talk about plastics packaging, all of these types of things, and how to promote the circular economy and how to make sure we're fully leveraging and engaging the supply chain, but also, making sure that everyone is, or that folks are working collaboratively toward a common goal, because I think you're hearing folks saying the same thing. We all want to strive to reduce, reuse, recycle, and make sure that we're talking about every single one of those R's and not necessarily just the last R. Having said that, the recyclability playbook obviously focuses on that last R, because we do know that there's still a time and a place for packaging. But with that, unless Joe, is there anything else you wanted me to touch on?
Oh, you've jam-packed quite a bit there, 10 and 25 minutes. It's so impressive to see. Not only are you working or have launched the playbook, which was certainly the focus of today's webinar, but these other side initiatives that are not so small, that are really tied into what you're trying to make happen with the playbook itself are impressive. And we always think it's important for the leaders in this in their space to be able to profile those things. So congratulations, I guess, from us first and foremost. There are questions coming in. Some of them are, I've tried to group in sort of themes. So if you can stick around for a few of them, Jen, we'd really, really appreciate it. The first one, which I think is a common one that you've probably answered before and has come to mind, is this whole idea of, I guess, judging or labeling recyclability and compostability. And I say that in the context of there being really truly an absence in standardization around what's defined as recyclability and compostability. And so, what happens is people sort of apply their own lens or their own criteria to defining those things. And the issue is that, you sell products globally and recycling is really a local activity. So can you talk a little bit about, and you mentioned in your talk that this is a toolbook that was, or a playbook that was created by a global team. So can you talk about the process by which you all came to agree upon how you're defining recyclability and compostability?
Yeah, so it definitely a lot of lively conversation, that's for sure. I would say that the Walmart recyclability, the recycling playbook would predominantly focus on North American recycling and what we can do in North America. So you'll see there's more commonalities between Walmart, between the US and Canada versus some other jurisdictions. To do this, we really did leverage in the industry. So again, talking to plastics recyclers, talking to processors, end users for input, and then reviewing it as a group and saying, does this work? Does this not work? What can we say? Where do we think we need to keep something as an advance? So in that yellow section, and not necessarily put it to a green section, or because there is some of that uncertainty within markets. I know that when we looked at it, and when you look through the recycling playbook, a lot of the things that fall in those green segments are typically the materials that would come to mind. So some of the mono resin, rigid plastics, LDPE film, paper that's molded fibers, those types of things that come to mind are typically kind of in that green section. The other interesting thing is in the US, they were willing to push a little harder in certain areas that maybe we as Canadians wouldn't have thought they would have pushed. So LDPE film is a great example where we have a little bit more widespread access to LDPE film recycling in Canada than they would in the US. But in the US, they're going at, they're looking at how do we innovate, how do we make sure that the processors are involved in those conversations and moving forward. You mentioned compostability, and there's a section on compost in the playbook. And this is always an interesting one, and probably one of the areas that we engage quite frequently with suppliers on. We have a lot of folks who want to come and present a biodegradable option. And what we're stressing is that we're really looking for certified compostable options to even out at the get-go, as opposed to opening it up to biodegradable. Done a lot of internal education sessions with folks so people understand that biodegradable doesn't mean compostable and that they're not directly interchangeable. And that's been, I think, really helpful for the team. So they're looking for specific things. They're also identifying areas where that type of packaging could be an option as opposed to going to it as a default. So looking at, is there enough, or is that package type suitable for the package that it's in? We're not seeing a lot of compostable packaging options coming forward. And I think to some extent it's because consumers don't have a lot of access to industrial composting programs, specifically in the U.S. We have a little bit more access here, but definitely not so much in the U.S. So there's always ongoing conversations there. But for compostables, we've got some best practices on labeling and certifications to keep an eye out for and look for.
Excellent.
It was a long-winded.
No, helpful, thank you. And I think that does give us a line of sight on how these broad decisions, complicated decisions are really narrowed into a judgment to try to judge a claim, which leads me to sort of a pivot to another category, which is increasing post-consumer resin content. And you've got percentages applied, or at least that are suggested in each of the package categories. Can you talk a little bit about what informed those percentages?
Yeah, so again, a lot of consultation with industry, a lot of consultation with suppliers of packaging to sort of say, what's your experience been? Do you notice certain, is there any degradation of quality or things like that? And that sort of helped to guide those discussions. Some of it is also about availability. So what could be available in the market in terms of sizing for volume and quantity. And that's definitely something that I think all manufacturers and suppliers are talking about now. Is it's needed, in order to drive that circular economy, there needs to be the demand for post-consumer content, but at the same time, you need to be able to access it in order to move it into your products. And I think some of that is just a matter of time until we sort of streamline and help drive that demand and see it coming through. But it was basically, the short answer is it was designed based on discussions with industry.
Right. And so let's maybe move to this whole idea of really how Walmart uses this or collaborates at this point with their supplier. And what I took from your PowerPoint, Jen, is at this point, this is a guidance document. It's not a mandatory document at this point. Is that safe to say?
Yes, that's definitely fair. Again, we have some targets and commitments that we're striving for 2025 for our private brand products to move into 100% reusable, recyclable, or compostable packaging by 2025. But at this stage, we're still, we're talking to folks and we're having those conversations and trying to get people thinking about that. And then again, with the national brand, it's out there for discussion, and we're encouraging folks to have a look at it, but it's not mandatory at this point.
Great, and I don't need to, maybe unfair question at this time, but at one point there could be to meet the targets that you have set for yourselves. It stands to reason this could become something that's mandatory, and therefore you'll have to start actually monitoring the claims or monitoring the efforts and then tracking them towards those empirical values. Is that where you think this may be headed?
So we definitely, anytime we make a commitment, we're tracking, we track our progress, and we have some roadmaps to get there. I think what's interesting about the climate that we're in today, the number of additional companies that are making similar commitments, whether it be through Ellen MacArthur Foundation or through their own initiatives, a lot of companies are starting to have those same or express those same goals. So hopefully we see momentum in the industry continue to push that way. So we, maybe we can accelerate everyone's drive toward those similar goals.
Absolutely. You can't underestimate, the influence that retailers like Walmart really have on their vendors and suppliers. And if, as an industry, you start adopting the same qualifications, those are, really meaningful market shift opportunities. So I'm picking through some of the questions and maybe paraphrasing to the folks on the line, but I'm going to try to get through more of them. So lots of kudos coming through. I should echo that. So I'll just read one so you get the feels. Has really opened my eyes to the initiatives that you're taking at Walmart. I'm so glad you spoke today, so that's great. The second part of that is you talk about Walmart brand items. Will you eventually discontinue items outside of your brands who don't follow the initiative? So I think that sort of pivots from my question, which is it's at this point, it is optional. It is a guidance document to with a line of sight to become mandatory at some point.
I think it's hard to say what we would end up doing longer term, but again, I don't know, maybe I'm being naive and just a little too optimistic, but I'm hopeful that that momentum and just the conversations that we're having really do spur into a movement or a larger movement or an accelerated movement, because I do think that so many other suppliers and even other retailers are moving in this direction that I'm hopeful that we can continue that momentum forward, and just, who knows, maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised, right?
Sure, absolutely. The How to Recycle logo, you're saying that its use is being broadened. Does the organization who partners with you to give you the use of that, do they track, or do you track how much consumers actually leverage it or use it, or how much it's recognized? Do you know how it's playing in the marketplace?
So they have some stats that are on their website, but a lot of their data so far is focused on what consumers are looking for, and there is some data that says consumers would, they appreciate knowing what to do or having guidance on what to do. I'm not sure if they've got stats on the number of changes that have been made as a result, but I can look into it for sure.
Yeah, that'd be.
Yeah.
Pivoting completely in a different direction, and this obviously we know this is speculation, but we are seeing some recent media coverage on this whole idea of some of the products and packaging out there that really don't have a recycling solution, that are not collectible or recoverable, recyclable in the waste stream. There is a direction from the federal government to consider bans from distribution or sale, and really actually using the SEPA policy to target them as under toxicity. Wondering if the playbook doesn't scope in potential bans. It's really a first step for you in guidance, but do you want to comment on the federal government's sort of direction to go in this area? Is that helpful to you as a retailer to try to navigate through the myriad of products and plastic packaging that you're trying to encourage, I guess, to support your goals?
Yeah, so I think it's it's definitely encouraging that folks are taking a larger interest in some of these materials and coming up with harmonized solutions. So one of the things that we often talk about is the idea that harmonization with material types as well as processing of those materials really helps to design a product or a package in a specific or different way. So I think whenever we're looking at harmonization, that's always helpful. One of the things that we've committed to is getting out of difficult to recycle plastics. So things like PVC, that's probably the example that comes to mind most quickly, is something that we've committed to do. So I think that's really aligned with what the federal government is looking at. But definitely be interesting to see what comes out for sure.
Right, and just for our members and future members on the phone participating, I mean, if you're interested in our CO's comments, we have several times, or engage in the policy development at a federal level, and certainly support bans where we have first and foremost alternatives that are preferred, but then also those that really don't have a recycling solution. So if you haven't read our submissions to the policy, we encourage you and invite you to do so. Okay, I'll go back to some of these questions. Okay, one piece of plastic can only be recycled several times before the polymers are too short to recycle. Very technical. What is the plan for end of recyclability life?
So that's a good one. And I think one of the things that we've also chatted about, and it was in our plastics commitment that I neglected to speak about, so sorry about that, is this idea of innovation, because you're right, at the end of the day, there will be materials that need to be effectively disposed of in some way, shape, or form. And so that idea of looking at innovation and looking at alternative options and exploring those innovation pathways is something that we've considered and is pretty important to our overall viewpoint on that, or pardon me, our goals.
Okay, thank you for that. This might be broader than plastics, but we'll ask the question anyways. Can you talk a little bit about customer returns? The question really is just that. What's the process, I guess, that you undertake with respect to any product? I don't imagine you're getting a lot of packaging returns, but any product returns. Can you give us a bit of insight?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, so if I missed the mark, I'm sorry. But obviously from a returns perspective, there are a number of different things that we take into consideration. What is the product? Is there, how can it be effectively managed at the end of its life, if that's the state of it? It really is product dependent and situational dependent on the situation. So there's not a one size fits all response or answer for products that are returned.
Okay. Someone's asked a question. I'm just going to call it out so maybe they can elaborate. Could bioplastics be used? So if you ask that question, if you could elaborate maybe with a follow-up, but I'm assuming that means could your vendors and suppliers use bioplastics? And it's also, maybe definition dependent. I'm not sure if bioplastics it has a standard definition, but do you want to try that one, Jen?
I think you kind of hit on it. So a bio-based material really just, it's referring to the source of the materials and does not necessarily mean that the package is compostable or biodegradable. So I'm not sure if the question was geared toward if something was labeled biodegradable. In our opinion, it's not the same as being compostable, but a bio-based material could also end up being a PET material, which would be recyclable, not biodegradable. I don't know if that helps or is more confusing.
Yeah, I think that's what that was the spirit of the question. Okay, it's 10 to 1. I just want to end with some closing remarks. But first and foremost, thank you so much, Jen. We really, really appreciate the time that you've taken to prep for this and to certainly be part of our inaugural kickoff to our webinar series. Is a very rich, detailed, impressive playbook that really important for folks to know that this is where big influencers like Walmart are taking a leadership role, and really how comprehensive it is to trickle down to your suppliers and vendors. So thank you so much for that. Congratulations to you and your and the work that you're doing. So to those of you on the line that joined us today, thank you so much as well. A quick reminder to be on the lookout for upcoming Plastic Action Center webinars announcements, with featured experts from governments, from independents and other organizations, partnerships that are doing interesting things, really forward thinking to those that are actually, again, putting circular economy concepts into action and being part of plastic waste solutions. And to that end, we'd really love to hear from anybody on the line. If there's any subject matter or speaker or area that you want us to touch on in relation to taking action on plastics. We'd love to hear from you. Share with us what you know and what are important resources or resources that actually don't exist that you wish did, for ideas for future webinar topics. We invite that. And if you have, in fact, a topic or a guest idea around education, engagement, empowerment, policy development, corporate commitments, that's all welcome. Please book plasticactioncentre.ca and visit it often. We post new material daily. And certainly we encourage you to follow us on our social media channels, which are also linked to the plasticactioncentre.ca as well. So we will ensure to keep all of those that are with us today informed on the next series speaker. We anticipate that will be coming out in weeks. And with that, thank you again, Jen, and good afternoon, everyone. Stay healthy.